Hi, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Lindy Jung. I am a writer, and I make videos on this channel about writing, books, travel, and pretty much whatever else I feel like. I feel like it's been a little while since I've sat down and done any sort of writing advice that wasn't necessarily related to my fantasy world building series. Specifically, I wanted to talk again about plotting and structure and character-driven plots. That's going to be today's theme. We're going to be talking about character-driven plots. So at one point, a little bit earlier in what I guess you would call my writing journey, I definitely struggled to write plots that didn't feel like they were just a series of events where things were happening to the characters. This is something that I notice in published books, that I notice in basically every type of story that's put out. Film, TV, whatever. It is a super common problem. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. I really, don't want to use that word because, as we know, prescriptivist writing advice is for the birds. If you don't want to write a character-driven plot, you don't have to. And it can absolutely serve your story and make for a compelling narrative. But I see this a lot in cut and paste quest narratives. So in fantasy, which is what I primarily write, it's definitely something that is quite common and does not necessarily bother me, but does make for a less engaging reading experience. Personally, I think that some of the strongest narratives I've read are ones where the characters are an active driving force in the story. They are shaping the plot versus the plot shaping them. Of course, you want a bit of balance between the two, but in short, I really like a good character-driven narrative, and I struggled for a really long time to figure out how to write those. How do we get that magic? How do we make the characters feel like they are a force to be reckoned with and they are making things happen? I also love it when stories do this in a really logical way or a very coherent way, where you can absolutely see where the character's coming from, why they are the way they are, and you can sort of tell in a non-predictable way every action that they take in the plot, within the structure of the narrative. Every move that they make makes perfect sense as to who they are. Even if it catches you off guard, even if you couldn't necessarily see it coming, it just makes sense given who they are as a person. A really strong example of this is HBO's Barry, which I haven't started watching the last season, so no spoilers, please. And then, interestingly, other example of this sort of character-driven plot is Severance on Apple TV, I believe. And that one is so fascinating to me because the characters are such drivers of the plot, but technically they don't have any agency in their world. I think TV shows are a really great medium for this sort of character-driven plot nonsense because obviously you get a lot more time with these people, and then you get to check out different characters. You really get to just take your time and explore who they are, where they're coming from, what they're gonna do, and then every sort of beat that they make lines up and makes sense in the end. But obviously, I am a writer of books and short stories, and I am assuming you probably are as well, although of course I love and welcome all my script writers. So let's think about how we can attain this within more compact narratives that don't necessarily go on for seasons at a time. I thought about this a lot, and then I came up with my own little almost mnemonic device, but not really, just a little hack, I guess, to achieve these character-driven stories in 3 quick and simple steps, and I'm calling it the 3 C's. So, what are the 3 C's? I'm characterizing them as context, choice, and consequence. This is, of course, a little bit derivative of GMC, or Goal, Motivation, and Conflict, of which there is an amazing craft book written. Every strong scene should have goal, motivation, and conflict embedded into it or in the background, in the subtext. But GMC is less about driving the plot forward and more about making sense of the character's internal life, their arc, their development. The 3 C's are going to be a little bit different because I'm going to focus mostly on the external because we're, of course, again, focusing on plot, while these can also be applied to internal conflict and internal story and development. It's really going to be something that happens outside of the character as they impose their will onto the world outside of them, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and dissect this really quick. Part 1 is context, the first C. So here, the goal is to contextualize whatever beat you're writing. A beat is a moment in the story that may or may not drive the plot forward. It's an important plot beat. When you're thinking about Save the Cat, those story moments, those story beats, that's what we're talking about, but it can be anything. So we're going to contextualize this beat both externally and internally. We're going to be thinking about what the conflict is that's occurring, like the actual physical or metaphysical conflict, what environment this beat is taking place in, and most importantly, we're going to take into account the character's personal history, how they got to this point, to this conflict or moment or whatever, and what their general feelings are about it. And this is going to be really important because when we consider the next part of this thing, the next C, which is choice, we want our character's choice to make sense given who they are, what they've gone through leading up to this moment and what the event directly preceding this is. It all has to make sense. So a pop culture example for this, and big spoilers for The Last of Us, the game and the show, in case you haven't jumped onto that bandwagon yet. At the very end of the story, Joel brings Ellie to the Fireflies in order to basically figure out a cure using her body. However, he ends up finding out that she has to die in order for this cure to be developed. Joel, at this point, his context is that he's bonded really strongly with Ellie. He's lost a young daughter before, and that has really affected him to the point where it was revealed in the show he tried to commit suicide. And Ellie is now filling in this hole in his heart for maybe the first time since that happened. So that is Joel's context. So my example, I'm just going to pull directly from one of my past projects. This is my Korean-inspired young adult fantasy. So one of the side characters is the eldest illegitimate son of the king of this land. He's incredibly intelligent, he's really politically savvy, he knows what he's doing basically, and he could actually make a positive impact on the people and the country as a whole. And he knows this, and pretty much everyone knows this. Everyone with 2 brain cells to rub together. However, because of his lineage and his illegitimacy, he's always been pushed aside in favor of his younger than him, but the full legitimate son of the king, the crown prince, who is just a total lazy, does not care, only wants to party, totally abuses his power in really like minor ways in the grand scheme of things, but definitely abuses his power. He just doesn't care about anything other than having a good time. He's a total like party boy, fuck boy, that kind of thing, but think like historical Korean fuck boy. The illegitimate prince is really frustrated by this. He has actually tried to guide his brother sort of onto the right path by giving him tutoring, but ultimately he ends up just giving him the answers and then his brother taking credit, and it's very frustrating for him. So now that those examples of context are laid out, part 2 is going to be choice. With all the groundwork laid out for this character or these characters in mind, now you get to put them in a situation where they have to decide. This doesn't have to be a direct choice like, oh, here's, red pill, blue pill, which one are you going to pick? It can be given an opportunity or seeing an opportunity and deciding to either take it or not take it, or just having something come to mind like some sort of plan to sabotage a rival. It could be anything, but basically they are going to make a decision to act or not act. And now you get to consider, given their context, what are they going to do? The pop culture example of The Last of Us is very, very clear. Joel is not going to give up his second foster daughter. He ends up killing basically all of the people at the compound, all of the Fireflies, all the doctors, and getting her out of there. Given what we know about him, and given that we've spent a whole season/game learning about his history and learning about their bond and seeing it develop, this makes perfect sense. Even though it is not a very logical course of action and ultimately will end up hurting a lot of people, it just makes sense for his character. My example is that our 2 princes, the illegitimate one and the legitimate one, end up coming across a goblin in the woods. They get it out of a trap and it grants each of them a gift, which is very like, Korean folklore-y. So our illegitimate prince is given a silver tongue, which allows him to charm anyone with his words. But then the irresponsible crown prince, who is a little bit of, a fuckboy, he ends up just offending this goblin and getting cursed with obedience, a la El Enchanted, which I thought was very fun, honestly. And now the eldest brother has an opportunity. It's not a direct choice, but he comes up with a very quick plan, makes a decision, and decides to send his eldest brother away using that obedience curse, just ordering him out of the city, basically. Now for part 3, which is consequence. This, I feel like, is going to be the most important element of the 3 Cs. It's going to be the one that pushes your plot forward continuously. It's going to be what leads into that next beat, that next scene, and just let the story unravel, let the conflict unravel as time goes on. So, now that we have the context for the choice and it has been made, what is going to happen next? You want to really think about what logical repercussions are going to exist for this character's action or inaction. And there's always going to be consequences, either external or internal. It could be, someone coming after the main character for, choosing to let someone die or kill them, seeking revenge, that sort of thing. Or it could be the character just grappling with their guilt for the rest of the time and constantly trying to make up for that choice that they made. It can also be positive. I feel like negative consequences are more likely to push the story forward. It's like the easier way out, but I absolutely think it would be interesting to play with positive consequences and sort of see how the story develops from there. Ideally, throughout the course of your plot, there's going to be positive and negative consequences. That's sort of up and down. That's what creates like a good character arc. Good is so subjective, but that's what creates a really compelling character arc that will keep you glued to the page. It's never going to be linear, it's never going to be point A to point Z. It's going to have so many stops along the way. Growth is it's a process. Whatever you end up deciding, consequences are what's going to push your character-driven plot and your character's development forward. So, our pop culture example, The Last of Us. I'm actually going to leak into The Last of Us 2 because basically that first game and the first season ends with Joel making that decision and getting Ellie the fuck out of there at the start of the second game. And again, this is spoilers now for parts of the show that have not happened yet, but at the start of The Last of Us 2, the game, Joel dies because the daughter of one of the men he killed while trying to save Ellie basically murders him out of revenge. Another consequence is that because Joel ends up lying to Ellie about what he did, they have some conflict and she ends up finding out what he did later on, and that becomes a whole big thing for her. That actually furthers her development, which is very interesting. In my example, our illegitimate prince has chased his brother out of the city and has now gotten everything he's ever wanted. He uses his silver tongue to ascend in court, but then of course it doesn't last. Even though he's established as the legitimate heir in his brother's absence, he ends up getting a taste of his own medicine because his brother breaks his curse, comes back to claim his throne, and is now actually sort of, almost, might be good at being a leader, and definitely is good at starting a war, so there's a war of succession that happens. Ironically, this conflict ends up wreaking a lot of havoc on the country and its people, because of course, that's what war does, and they both sort of end up getting hurt because of it. Now that you understand the 3 C's, and you've seen some examples of each beat, let's put it all together and try to figure out a scene. So, context. Our main character, let's call her Fern because I've been liking plant names a lot lately. Like, the main character of Moths is Larkspur, and then, honestly, that's the only one I can think of, but, you know, just been loving the plant names. Let's say she's a failing magician, and she comes from this really long line of great wizards, like powerful sorcerers, people who have changed the shape of the world and, like, whisper things into the ears of kings, and she's just not that good at magic. Fern's family absolutely equates magical power with human value, so she's kind of got the short end of the stick there. She can't help it. She's been training really hard her whole life. She just doesn't have the raw power necessary to do most of the things that her family would expect from a wizard of her age, or a magician. They're all the same. She is sick and tired of being the least valued player of her magician family, even though she's enrolled at the most prestigious magical wizard school. Fucking always a magical school. She's getting all this tutelage, she's trying so hard, she just can't get it. And that's her context. Now, choice. Her school has its own sort of dark and evil history, because of course it does. Academic institutions are not always the best. She ends up finding or stumbling across or finding out about, it doesn't really matter at this point, but she finds out about this demon that if she binds a little bit of her soul to it, she can get all of its power. She can access that power, which is exactly what she needs, what she's been looking for, and up until now, she thought there was no solution for her. Of course, the choice is obvious. She is down on her luck. She equates magical ability to, you know, human worth. She thinks she is worthless because she doesn't have this sort of raw power, and her family treats her that way, and that's why she thinks that. And she's at this school, and it's competitive, and she's stressed and tired and at her wit's end, so she summons the demon, and consequence. So summoning the demon binds it to her, and now it can basically use her as a meat puppet whenever. That's just like magic rules, whatever. But another consequence of this action is that Fern realizes that magical power isn't all that it's cut out to be. She has all this like raw power to tap now, but she doesn't really want to do the things that her family does. She doesn't want to like corrupt royalty or start and end wars or do all of that shit. She kind of just wants to, I don't know, like chill out and study and learn and do something more useful, but with this demon attached to her, it's like everything, it's whispering horrible things in her ear. She can't get rid of it. She can't buck this influence. And now she's kind of stuck. Someone, maybe like an academic rival, the former top student in her class, is like, hey, that's pretty suspicious that Fern couldn't even, I don't know, like summon a butterfly and now she can topple buildings with a snap of her fingers. I'm gonna investigate that, and that causes problems too. It could be anything. There could be so many different, you know, it's a domino effect. So many different things could come about from this choice that the character's making. But in any case, that is it. That is how I've been approaching character-driven stories lately. I hope this is helpful for you. I hope that I explained it well enough. It's sometimes hard to articulate the things that occur in my brain. But this was a lot of fun to talk about. Let me know if you have any thoughts on this method in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.